May 27, 1940. A farmhouse 3 kilometers south of Calais. Hauptmann Wilhelm Steiner crouched behind a stone wall, watching his platoon drag a captured British machine gun across the muddy field. The weapon was strange-looking. A curved magazine protruding from the top, a conical flash hider, a carrying handle that seemed too delicate for combat. It looked almost civilian, like something designed for a shooting club rather than warfare. His men were laughing. They'd captured dozens of British weapons during the advance through France. Most were antiquated, poorly maintained, or already broken. This one appeared intact, still warm from recent firing. The British gunner who'd been manning it lay dead 20 meters away, killed by a rifle grenade before he could retreat with his section. Steiner examined the weapon with professional interest. He'd been a gunsmith in civilian life, had worked for Mauser before the war. He understood firearms at a level most infantry officers didn't. The Bren gun, he'd heard it mentioned in intelligence briefings, was supposed to be the modern replacement for the British Lewis gun. It looked well made, but so had a lot of British equipment that had failed spectacularly under the stress of real combat. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, Steiner's senior NCO, carried the weapon to where the captain stood. Müller was grinning. Herr Hauptmann, the British left us a souvenir. Should we destroy it or keep it for testing? Steiner looked at the Bren gun more carefully. The metalwork was precise. No visible damage despite the firefight. The mechanism looked complex but not fragile. He made a decision that would lead to one of the most uncomfortable discoveries the Wehrmacht would make about Allied equipment. We keep it. I want to know what makes this weapon different. Clean it, inspect it, and prepare it for test firing. If it's worth understanding, we'll send it back to Waffenamt for re-evaluation. If it's British rubbish, we'll know that too. What Steiner didn't know, what none of them could have predicted, was that this captured Bren gun was about to reveal a truth that would haunt German ordnance departments for the rest of the war. The enemy, they'd been told, was inferior, weak, incapable of matching German engineering, had built a machine gun that worked better than anything in the Wehrmacht's arsenal. The British retreat from France had been chaotic and brutal. The Dunkirk evacuation was still days away, and British units were fighting desperate rearguard actions to buy time for the main force to reach the coast. Equipment was being abandoned everywhere. Vehicles, artillery pieces, small arms. The advancing German forces were capturing so much material that logistics units couldn't process it all. Most captured British weapons were destroyed or ignored. German soldiers had their own equipment, and carrying extra weapons made no tactical sense. But certain items were selected for intelligence evaluation, new designs, unusual mechanisms, anything that might reveal British technical capabilities or tactical doctrine. The Bren gun qualified because German intelligence had limited information about it. What they knew came from pre-war sources. The weapon was Czech in origin, manufactured under license in Britain, chambered for the British .303 caliber. It had replaced the Lewis gun starting in 1937. Beyond those basics, intelligence was sparse. How well did it perform in combat? How reliable was it? What were its tactical applications? These questions mattered because understanding enemy capabilities shaped German tactical responses. Steiner's platoon spent the evening of May 27th securing their position in the captured farmhouse. While his men dug fighting positions and established watch rotations, Steiner and Müller examined the Bren gun by lamplight. They field-stripped the weapon carefully, laying out components on a clean canvas cloth. What they saw surprised both of them. The machining quality was exceptional. Tolerances were tight, but not excessive. Every part showed evidence of careful manufacturing. The gas system was simple and robust. The barrel change mechanism was quick and practical. The sights were well designed for rapid target acquisition. This wasn't the work of an inferior industrial base. This was precision engineering applied intelligently. Muller, who'd been a metal worker before conscription, ran his fingers along the barrel. This is high-quality steel. Look at the rifling. Perfect. And the gas piston. This is smart design. Simple. Easy to maintain. Steiner nodded slowly. He was thinking about the MG-34, the German light machine gun that was standard issue for Wehrmacht infantry. The MG-34 was an excellent weapon, possibly the best machine gun in the world. But it was also complex, expensive to manufacture, and required skilled maintenance. This British weapon looked simpler. They reassembled the Bren gun. The process was straightforward, intuitive, no special tools required, no complex timing adjustments, just solid mechanical design that worked. Steiner chambered a round from captured British ammunition and dry-fired the weapon. The trigger pull was smooth. The action cycled cleanly. Everything felt right. "We test this tomorrow morning," Steiner said. "Full combat conditions. I want to see if British propaganda matches British performance." The next morning, May 28th, Steiner's platoon moved to a position overlooking an abandoned British supply dump. The area was secure, no enemy contact expected. Perfect conditions for weapons testing. They'd collected 200 rounds of British 303 ammunition from the battlefield, enough for a thorough evaluation. Muller mounted the Bren gun on its bipod, loaded the curved 30-round magazine, and assumed a firing position. The target was a wrecked British truck 400 meters away. Steiner stood beside him, watching through binoculars, ready to assess the weapon's performance. "Fire when ready," Steiner ordered. Muller squeezed the trigger. The Bren gun fired with a distinctive, rapid bark. 5 rounds, clean ejection, no hesitation. He fired again. Another 5-round burst, then 10 rounds, then a sustained burst of 20. The weapon cycled smoothly through every round. No stoppages, no feeding issues. The curved magazine, which had looked awkward, was feeding flawlessly. Hot brass ejected consistently to the right. The barrel remained stable on the bipod. Müller emptied the first magazine and reloaded. Fired again. Same result. Perfect function. They went through all 200 rounds in 30 minutes. Different firing positions, different rates of fire, different burst lengths. The Bren performed identically in every test. Not a single malfunction. Not even a hesitation. The weapon had fired 200 rounds of captured ammunition without cleaning, without adjustment, without any maintenance, and it hadn't jammed once. Steiner lowered his binoculars. His expression was carefully neutral, but Muller could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The German NCO spoke quietly. "Herr Hauptmann, I've never seen a machine gun this reliable. Not even our MG-34. Steiner didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about implications. If this level of reliability was standard for British weapons, if this wasn't a specially tuned test piece, but a regular production model, then German intelligence assessments were dangerously wrong. "We need to confirm this," Steiner said finally. "One test proves nothing. We'll fire it again tomorrow. And we need more captured ammunition. Find me 500 rounds. If this weapon performs the same way with 500 rounds, then we have something significant to report." Over the next 3 days, as the German advance slowed and consolidated, Steiner's platoon conducted extensive testing of the captured Bren gun. They fired it in different weather conditions. They deliberately introduced dirt and mud. They let it get hot, then cold. They loaded magazines hastily and imperfectly. They tried everything they could think of to make the weapon malfunction. It didn't. 537 rounds fired over 3 days. 0 stoppages. 0 failures to feed. 0 failures to extract. 0 failures to fire. The Bren gun worked with mechanical consistency that seemed almost impossible. Muller, who'd maintained MG-34s for 2 years, was particularly struck by the comparison. The German machine gun was excellent. but it required careful maintenance, proper lubrication, and attention to detail. The Bren seemed almost maintenance-free. On May 31st, Steiner wrote his report. He kept the language professional and factual, but the conclusion was unavoidable. The British Bren gun represented a significant technical achievement. Its reliability under adverse conditions exceeded German light machine guns. Its simplicity of maintenance and operation made it ideal for conscript armies with limited training time. Its accuracy was excellent. The only weakness Steiner could identify was the limited magazine capacity. 30 rounds versus the belt-fed German systems. He sent the report up the chain of command with the captured weapon. 2 weeks later, he received acknowledgement that the Bren had been forwarded to the Waffenamt, the German Army's weapons testing and procurement office in Berlin. The technical experts there would conduct their own evaluation. Steiner assumed that would be the end of his involvement. He was wrong. In late June 1940, he received orders to report to Berlin for consultation. They wanted to talk to the officer who'd first tested the Bren. The Waffenamt facility in Berlin was a sprawling complex of laboratories, testing ranges, and workshops. It was where Germany's weapons were evaluated, improved, and approved for production. The men who worked there were a mix of military officers and civilian engineers, all focused on maintaining Germany's technical superiority in armaments. They took that mission seriously. German weapons were supposed to be the best in the world. Anything that challenged that assumption was uncomfortable. Hauptmann Steiner arrived on June 24 and was immediately escorted to a secure testing range. There, he found 3 senior engineers standing around a table covered with machine guns. His captured Bren, 2 MG-34s, an MG-42 prototype, the new weapon that was supposed to replace the 34 with even higher performance, and on another table, test results, pages of data. The senior engineer, a man named Dr. Friedrich Hartmann, greeted Steiner formally. "Hauptmann, your report was quite detailed. We've conducted our own testing of this British weapon. We need to verify some findings with you." Steiner nodded. "What did you need verified?" Hartmann gestured at the data sheets. "You reported 0 malfunctions over 500 rounds. We've fired this weapon over 3,000 rounds. We've introduced contamination, temperature extremes, and improper maintenance. We've done everything possible to induce failure. The weapon has malfunctioned exactly twice, both times due to defective cartridges, not mechanical problems. Is this consistent with your field observations?" Steiner felt a cold understanding settling in. "Yes, Herr Doctor, that's consistent. The weapon is extremely reliable." Hartmann's expression was troubled. He picked up one of the test reports and read from it, quote, "The British Bren light machine gun demonstrates reliability characteristics superior to current Wehrmacht light machine guns under comparable test conditions. Its simple gas operation and robust construction allow it to function with minimal maintenance. Its magazine-fed system, while limiting sustained fire capability, eliminates belt-related stoppages." End quote. He set the paper down. "Hauptmann, this presents a problem. Our doctrine assumes German technical superiority. Our propaganda tells soldiers that British equipment is inferior. But this weapon is objectively better than our own in critical performance metrics. How do we explain this?" Steiner understood the political dimension. Admitting British superiority in anything contradicted the entire Nazi narrative about racial and cultural supremacy. But lying about technical facts got soldiers killed. He chose his words carefully. "Herr Doctor, the Bren is better in some ways, not all ways. Our MG-34 has higher sustained fire rate. Our doctrine emphasizes volume of fire. The British weapon is optimized for different tactical use. Perhaps both philosophies have merit." It was a diplomatic answer, but Hartmann wasn't interested in diplomacy. He was an engineer. He cared about facts. Yes, Hauptmann. But if we're honest, reliability is the most important characteristic of any infantry weapon. A gun that doesn't fire is worthless regardless of its theoretical rate of fire. The British have solved the reliability problem better than we have. That's uncomfortable but true. The testing continued through the summer of 1940. The Waffenamt acquired more captured Brens, over a dozen by August. Each weapon was subjected to brutal testing protocols. Each weapon performed with remarkable consistency. The data accumulated into an unavoidable conclusion. British light machine gun technology was, in the specific and critical area of reliability, superior to German equivalents. This discovery triggered intense debate within German military circles. Some officers argued for developing German copies of the Bren. Others insisted that improving existing designs was preferable to admitting British superiority. Still others suggested that different tactical doctrines made direct comparisons meaningless. The debate was complicated by ideology. Admitting that the British, considered racially inferior in Nazi propaganda, had built something better was politically dangerous. The practical result was compromise. Germany wouldn't copy the Bren directly, but they'd incorporate its design principles into future weapons development. The simplicity of the gas system, the robust magazine design, the ease of maintenance. These lessons would inform the evolution of German small arms. But officially, German weapons remained superior. The Bren was acknowledged as well-designed, but not as a direct threat to German technical prestige. Meanwhile, on the front lines, German soldiers were reaching their own conclusions. As the war expanded into North Africa, the Eastern Front, and the Mediterranean, Wehrmacht troops encountered more British equipment, and they kept finding Brens. Often, they kept them. Using captured enemy weapons was officially discouraged but practically common. Soldiers cared about survival, not doctrine. If a captured weapon worked better than issued equipment, they used it. Obergefreiter Klaus Schmidt, fighting with the Afrika Korps in Libya in early 1941, wrote a letter home that captured this reality. "We captured a British position last week. Found their machine gun intact. It's a Bren, a British design. We tested it, and I've never seen anything so reliable. Fires every time, never jams. Our MG-34 is good, but this is better. Don't tell anyone I said that, but it's true. We're keeping it for our squad." Schmidt's sentiment was widely shared but rarely spoken openly. German soldiers respected their own weapons, but they also respected good engineering regardless of origin. The Bren earned that respect through performance. Stories circulated through the Wehrmacht about sections that had fought entire engagements with captured Brens, about weapons that had fired thousands of rounds without cleaning, about reliability that seemed almost magical compared to the maintenance demands of German equipment. This created an awkward situation for German command. They couldn't officially acknowledge that troops preferred captured British weapons. That would undermine morale and contradict propaganda. But they also couldn't deny the practical reality. So they compromised with silence. Captured Brens weren't encouraged, but they weren't strictly forbidden either. As long as ammunition was available, soldiers could use what worked. Before we go further into this story, I want to take a moment to ask you something. If you're finding these deep dives into military history fascinating, if you appreciate the real stories behind the weapons and the soldiers who use them, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community of people who love the details that textbooks skip, the uncomfortable truths that propaganda buried. More stories like this are coming, and you won't want to miss them. The technical analysis of the Bren continued through 1941 and 42. German engineers dissected the weapon's design philosophy, trying to understand what made it so reliable. They identified several key factors. First, the gas system was simple and over-engineered. It had large tolerances that accommodated dirt and carbon buildup without affecting function. German designs were more precise, which gave better performance in ideal conditions but made them more sensitive to contamination. Second, the magazine system was brilliantly designed. The curved magazine, which had looked awkward, was actually essential to reliable feeding. The curve matched the taper of the rimmed 303 British cartridge, allowing rounds to feed smoothly without binding. The magazine lips were precisely dimensioned but forgiving of variation. Even hastily loaded or slightly damaged magazines worked consistently. This was engineering that anticipated real-world use rather than ideal conditions. Third, the barrel change system was practical and fast. The British had recognized that sustained fire required barrel changes, and they'd made the process simple enough for a soldier to do in combat without tools. German machine guns had barrel change capabilities, but they were more complex. The Bren's approach was elegant in its simplicity. Lift the barrel catch, pull the old barrel out, insert the new barrel, close the catch. 10 seconds, even under stress. Fourth, the overall design philosophy was different. German machine guns were optimized for maximum rate of fire and sustained suppression. They were belt-fed to support continuous firing. They were complex because complexity bought performance. The Bren was optimized for reliability and ease of use. It accepted lower rate of fire in exchange for guaranteed function. It used magazines instead of belts because magazines were simpler and more soldier-proof. Neither philosophy was wrong. They reflected different tactical doctrines and different assumptions about warfare. The Germans emphasized volume of fire and expected skilled operators. The British emphasized reliability and assumed their weapons would be used by hastily trained conscripts. Both approaches had merit, but in the brutal reality of combat, reliability often mattered more than theoretical performance. Dr. Hartmann summarized this in a confidential report to the Waffenamt leadership in December 1941. The British Bren represents a coherent design philosophy that prioritizes function over performance, reliability over complexity, ease of use over theoretical capability. In ideal conditions, German weapons are superior. In real combat conditions, especially when operated by average soldiers under stress, the Bren's advantages become significant. We should consider incorporating similar design priorities in future development. The report was received politely and then mostly ignored. Changing fundamental design philosophy required admitting previous approaches were flawed. It required challenging the assumptions that had guided German small arms development for decades. Institutional inertia was powerful. The MG-34 remained in production. The new MG-42, while incorporating some lessons about ease of manufacture, retained the complex high-performance approach. German doctrine didn't change, but individual German soldiers and units did change their practices. In North Africa, it became relatively common to see Wehrmacht sections with 1 or 2 Bren supplementing their standard weapons. The British were generous suppliers, having left substantial stocks behind during their retreats in early 1941. German troops collected these weapons and the 303 ammunition needed to feed them. They learned to maintain them, to use them effectively, to trust them. Lieutenant Rolf Steiner, no relation to Wilhelm Steiner but another officer who'd encountered the Bren in combat, wrote in his diary in May 1942, "Fought British patrol near Tobruk. Captured another Bren. This is the 4th one our company has acquired. The men prefer them to our own machine guns for reliability. I've stopped trying to enforce regulations about captured weapons. If it keeps my men alive, I don't care what flag it was built under." This pragmatic attitude was common among frontline officers. They'd learned that survival mattered more than doctrine, that good equipment was good equipment regardless of origin. that the propaganda about German superiority was sometimes just propaganda. They didn't speak this openly, but they acted on it. The Bren's presence in German units was quiet acknowledgement that the enemy had built something better. The Eastern Front presented different challenges, but similar conclusions. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, they expected to face Soviet equipment almost exclusively. But the British had supplied substantial amounts of material to the Soviets through Lend-Lease, including Bren guns. German forces encountering these weapons initially assumed they were captured from British units. Then they realized the Soviets were manufacturing them under license, having received the technical specifications from Britain. This was particularly interesting because the Soviets had their own light machine gun, the DP-28, which was simple, reliable, and well-suited to Soviet manufacturing capabilities and tactical doctrine. Yet they were also producing Brens. German intelligence analysts noted this in reports. If the Soviets, who had no shortage of machine gun designs, were investing resources in Bren production, it suggested the weapon had qualities the Soviets valued. That was high praise, given Soviet pragmatism about equipment. German soldiers captured Soviet-made Brens and found they performed identically to British originals. Same reliability, same ease of use, same tactical effectiveness. The design translated across manufacturing cultures without losing its essential character. That was another indicator of robust engineering. A design that could be built by different nations with different industrial practices and still work consistently was fundamentally sound. By mid-1942, the Waffenamt had compiled extensive data on the Bren. They'd tested over 30 captured examples. They'd interviewed dozens of frontline soldiers. They'd analyzed combat reports from 3 different theaters. The conclusion was consistent and uncomfortable. The Bren gun was more reliable than any German light machine gun. Not slightly more reliable, significantly, measurably, undeniably more reliable. This created a strategic problem. Germany was committed to total war, mobilizing its entire industrial capacity for military production. Resources were finite. Choices about what to produce mattered enormously. Should Germany invest in improving existing designs to match Bren reliability? Should they develop entirely new weapons incorporating British design principles? Should they simply acknowledge that current weapons, while less reliable, were adequate for German tactical doctrine? These questions had no easy answers. The debate intensified in 1943 as Germany's strategic situation deteriorated. The disasters at Stalingrad and in North Africa meant Germany was losing the initiative, moving toward defensive warfare. In defensive combat, reliability mattered even more. Weapons needed to function during sustained engagements, often with limited maintenance opportunities. The Bren's design advantages became more significant as German tactical circumstances worsened. Some forward-thinking German officers argued for radical solutions. Oberst Heinrich Müller, a staff officer involved in equipment procurement, wrote a memo in March 1943 proposing that Germany simply copy the Bren directly, manufacture it in German calibers, issue it to Wehrmacht infantry, acknowledge that the British had solved the light machine gun problem better than Germany had. The memo was technically sound and strategically sensible. It was also politically impossible. Copying an enemy weapon, especially a British weapon, would be public admission of German inferiority. Nazi ideology couldn't tolerate that admission. Hitler's entire regime was built on assertions of German superiority, Aryan excellence, the destiny of the master race to dominate inferior peoples. How could that narrative survive acknowledging that the British had built better infantry weapons? The cognitive dissonance was too great. The memo was buried. Instead, Germany doubled down on existing approaches. The MG-42 was pushed into full production. It was an excellent weapon, arguably the best general-purpose machine gun of the war, with a phenomenal rate of fire exceeding 1,000 rounds per minute. But it was also complex, expensive, and still more maintenance-intensive than the Bren. It represented a different philosophy carried to its logical extreme. Maximum firepower, accepting the cost in complexity and logistics. The MG-42 was effective, devastatingly so in defensive positions where its high rate of fire could break up infantry assaults. But it couldn't match the Bren's reliability under poor maintenance conditions, couldn't match its ease of use by average soldiers, couldn't match its soldier-proof operation. German tactical doctrine adapted to work around these limitations, emphasizing trained machine gun specialists and robust logistical support. But the limitations remained. Meanwhile, the Bren continued serving in British and Commonwealth forces with quiet excellence. It saw combat in every theatre: desert, jungle, Arctic, urban, mountain. It performed consistently everywhere. British soldiers developed absolute trust in the weapon. That trust translated into tactical confidence, into willingness to take necessary risks, into the psychological foundation that makes infantry effective. You can't quantify trust in statistics, but its impact on combat effectiveness is enormous. German intelligence continued tracking Bren performance throughout the war. Reports from prisoners of war consistently praised the weapon. Captured British training manuals showed a simple, practical approach to Bren operation that German analysts envied. The British didn't need extensive machine gun schools or specialist training. They could take a conscript with minimal experience, give him a few days with a Bren, and have a competent gunner. German machine gun training took weeks and required more specialized skill. This difference reflected the design philosophy gap. The Bren was designed to be used by average soldiers. German machine guns were designed to be used by trained specialists. Both approaches worked, but they had different logistics implications. Britain could replace casualties more easily because their weapons didn't require extensive training. Germany needed to preserve experienced machine gunners because their weapons demanded expertise. As the war progressed and Germany's manpower situation became desperate, this difference mattered. By 1944, some German units were using captured Brens as standard equipment. Entire squads armed with British weapons and supplied with captured ammunition. This was particularly common in secondary theatres where supply was irregular and soldiers used whatever they could find. The Balkans, Italy, rear area security units. The Bren's reliability made it ideal for troops who couldn't count on regular maintenance, support, or spare parts. There are documented cases of German units defending positions with Brens against British attacks, the ultimate irony. British soldiers being fired on by their own weapons, captured and turned against them. The Bren performed just as reliably in German hands as it had in British hands. The engineering didn't care about politics or ideology, it just worked. Feldwebel Otto Kruger, fighting with a security battalion in Yugoslavia in late 1944, described this in his memoirs. Half our section's weapons were captured. British Brens, Soviet PPSH submachine guns, American carbines. We used what we could get. The Brens were the most prized. They never failed. In combat against partisans, when you might fire thousands of rounds in a day, reliability was everything. Our issued weapons couldn't match it. The post-war analysis by military historians has examined this phenomenon extensively. Why did German soldiers, indoctrinated to believe in German superiority, so readily adopt enemy weapons when they proved better? The answer is brutally simple. Survival overrides ideology. A soldier facing death doesn't care about propaganda. He cares about equipment that works. The Bren worked, consistently and reliably, and that earned respect that transcended national boundaries. This respect was reciprocated, interestingly. British soldiers who captured German MG-42s recognized the weapon's devastating firepower. They understood that German machine guns excelled in different ways. The mutual professional acknowledgement between enemies, the recognition that good engineering existed on both sides, was one of the war's quiet undercurrents. Propaganda said the enemy was inferior. Experience taught that the enemy was human, capable of excellence and failure like anyone else. The Bren story within the Wehrmacht is ultimately about the gap between ideology and reality. Nazi doctrine insisted on German superiority in all things. Reality demonstrated that superior engineering could come from anywhere, that good ideas didn't respect racial or national boundaries, that acknowledging enemy excellence wasn't weakness but wisdom. The German military's failure to fully learn this lesson, to allow ideological considerations to override technical ones, was one of many factors in their defeat. If we're honest, this lesson applies beyond World War II. Any organization, military or otherwise, that lets ideology or pride prevent learning from others is handicapping itself. The best ideas win not because of where they come from, but because they work. The Bren worked. German soldiers recognized this, even when their leadership couldn't officially acknowledge it. That ground-level pragmatism kept men alive, even as strategic rigidity doomed the larger war effort. If you've stayed with this story to this point, you're clearly someone who appreciates the complex realities behind simple narratives. That's exactly the audience we're building here. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell, and consider sharing this with anyone else who loves history that challenges comfortable assumptions. The real stories are always more interesting than the propaganda, and we're here to tell them. The engineering lessons from the Bren German analysis influenced post-war small arms development worldwide. The principles of reliability over complexity, of designing for average users rather than specialists, of creating systems that worked under worst-case conditions rather than ideal ones, these became standard in modern firearms design. The Bren's influence is visible in weapons from multiple nations, even though direct copying was rare. The Soviet AK-47, developed in the late 1940s, embodied many Bren principles. Simple gas operation, loose tolerances, emphasis on reliability over precision. Mikhail Kalashnikov designed a weapon that would work when dirty, when cold, when poorly maintained, when used by conscripts with minimal training. That philosophy echoed the Bren's approach. Whether Kalashnikov was directly influenced by captured Brens or arrived at similar conclusions independently is debated, but the parallel is striking. Modern military rifles continue this tradition. The American M16, initially plagued by reliability problems, was eventually refined to emphasize the same principles. The Germans, G36, developed in the 1990s, learned the lessons German engineers should have learned in the 1940s. Reliability first, complexity only when it serves function. Designed for real users in real conditions. The Bren's ghost haunts modern small arms design. The specific story of German capture and evaluation of the Bren remained largely hidden for decades after the war. Documents were scattered, classified, or lost. The embarrassment of having acknowledged enemy superiority wasn't something surviving German officers wanted to publicize. British historians, focused on their own weapons development, didn't realize how much German analysis had occurred. The full picture only emerged gradually as archives opened and veterans spoke more freely. Wilhelm Steiner, the Hauptmann who first tested the captured Bren in May 1940, survived the war. He returned to gunsmithing in Bavaria, never spoke publicly about his wartime service, and died in 1978. His official report, filed in June 1940, remained in military archives until it was declassified in the 1990s. Researchers studying Wehrmacht equipment evaluation found it and recognized its significance. Steiner had identified something important, something that contradicted official narratives, and he'd reported it honestly despite the political implications. That honesty deserves recognition. Steiner was a German officer serving a regime whose ideology demanded he believe in German superiority. Yet, when confronted with evidence that the enemy had built something better, he reported the truth. He didn't let propaganda override professional judgment. He didn't distort facts to fit ideology. He just documented what he observed. That intellectual integrity, maintaining objectivity in the face of political pressure, is a kind of courage. Dr. Friedrich Hartmann, the Waffenamt engineer who conducted the extensive Berlin testing, had a more complicated post-war career. He was briefly detained by Allied forces during denazification proceedings, but was cleared of any war crimes. His technical work was recognized as non-ideological, focused on engineering rather than politics. He worked for several years helping the West German military establish its post-war ordnance evaluation systems. He died in 1969. The captured Brens tested in Berlin were lost in the chaos of the war's end. Soviet forces overran the Waffenamt facility in April 1945, and most equipment was either destroyed in the fighting or taken to the Soviet Union. A few Brens survived in collections and museums, but none can be definitively traced to the specific weapons tested by German engineers. The physical evidence is gone, but the documentation remains. The broader impact of German recognition of Bren quality is difficult to quantify, but real. It contributed to a gradual erosion of confidence in Nazi ideology among professional military officers. If the regime's claims about enemy inferiority were wrong about something as concrete as weapon design, what else might they be wrong about? This doubt, never openly expressed but present in the minds of thinking officers, weakened the Wehrmacht's cohesion as the war turned against Germany. It also influenced tactical adaptations. German units that had captured and used Brens shared their experiences informally through the officer corps network. The knowledge that enemy weapons were reliable changed how German soldiers approached British positions. They couldn't assume that British fire would be sporadic and unreliable. They had to respect that British machine gun sections would maintain consistent fire. This psychological factor, the certainty that enemy weapons would work, influenced tactical calculations in ways that never appeared in official reports. The story also illustrates the limits of technological superiority as a war-winning factor. Germany entered World War II believing their technical excellence would compensate for strategic and numerical disadvantages. They assumed that better weapons, better training, and better doctrine would overcome Allied advantages in manpower and industry. The Bren's performance challenged this assumption. Here was an enemy weapon that wasn't just adequate, it was better. And it was being produced in vast quantities by Britain's industrial base. If one British weapon was superior, might others be as well? Might the entire foundation of German confidence be misplaced? These questions were dangerous because they suggested the war might not be winnable through technical means. They implied that Germany's strategy relied on assumptions that weren't true. The logical conclusion that Germany should seek negotiated peace before total defeat became inevitable was politically impossible to voice. So the questions remained unspoken, and the war continued. The human cost of this silence was enormous. German soldiers continued fighting with equipment that, in key respects, was inferior to what they faced. They died in situations where better weapons might have saved them. The institutional inability to acknowledge and adapt to enemy excellence, driven by ideological rigidity, killed Germans just as surely as it killed the soldiers they fought against. This is the ultimate tragedy of totalitarian systems. They create environments where truth becomes optional, where reality must conform to ideology, rather than ideology adapting to reality. The Bren gun served British and Commonwealth forces through Korea, Malaya, Suez, and beyond. It was gradually replaced in the 1980s and 90s, but its fundamental design remained sound for over 50 years. That longevity is testament to the quality of the original Czech engineering and the British refinements. A weapon designed in the 1920s and 30s remained effective into the late 20th century. Very few military systems achieved that kind of sustained relevance. The German weapons that the Bren competed against had more varied fates. The MG-34 was phased out during the war in favor of the MG-42. The MG-42 served into the 1990s in various forms, testament to its own excellent design. But it followed a different philosophy, one that prioritized firepower over simplicity. Both approaches succeeded in their own terms. Both reflected coherent visions of what infantry firepower should accomplish. Neither was objectively wrong, but they were different. This brings us to a final reflection. The story of Germans capturing a British Bren gun and realizing it couldn't jam is really a story about recognizing excellence when you find it, regardless of source. It's about the difference between propaganda and reality, between ideology and engineering, between what we want to believe and what actually is. The German soldiers and engineers who encountered the Bren faced a choice. They could maintain comfortable beliefs about German superiority, or they could acknowledge uncomfortable truths about enemy capability. Many chose truth. Not publicly, not officially, but in their own minds and in their practical actions. They used captured Brens when they could. They reported honestly about Bren performance. They acknowledged, at least privately, that the enemy had built something better. This acknowledgement didn't make them traitors or defeatists. It made them professionals who valued facts over fantasy. In a war driven by propaganda and ideology, that commitment to reality was a form of resistance. The legacy of this story is relevant today. We live in an era of competing narratives, where ideology often trumps evidence, where acknowledging that others might have good ideas is seen as weakness. The German experience with the Bren teaches a different lesson. Recognizing excellence wherever you find it isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Learning from those you compete against isn't surrender, it's adaptation. The side that learns fastest wins, not the side with the most rigid ideology. The Bren gun was just a weapon, a well-designed, reliable, practical infantry tool. But in the hands of German evaluators trying to understand why it worked so well, it became something more. It became evidence that challenged foundational beliefs, that forced uncomfortable questions, that revealed the gap between propaganda and reality. Those German officers and soldiers who recognized the Bren's quality weren't betraying their nation. They were trying to serve it honestly, to provide accurate information that might save German lives. That their honesty was largely ignored, that institutional and ideological rigidity prevented Germany from learning the lessons the Bren taught is tragedy. Good intelligence, accurate evaluation, honest reporting, these are worthless if leadership won't listen. The information Wilhelm Steiner sent from France in June 1940 was correct and important. The analysis Friedrich Hartmann conducted in Berlin was thorough and insightful. But neither man had the power to change doctrine or overcome ideology. They could only document truth and hope it mattered. In the end, the Bren's influence on German thinking was subtle but real. It contributed to a broader understanding among professional military officers that Allied equipment was more capable than propaganda suggested. This understanding informed tactical adaptations, shaped procurement decisions where possible, and created a quiet current of skepticism about official narratives. That skepticism didn't stop the war or change its outcome, but it represented a victory for factual analysis over ideological blindness. The Bren gun that Hauptmann Steiner captured on May 27, 1940 near Calais travelled a remarkable journey. From a British farmhouse defensive position to German testing ranges, from field evaluation to laboratory analysis, from tactical use by Wehrmacht soldiers to documentation in technical reports. Through all of this, it performed with mechanical consistency that forced honest observers to acknowledge excellence regardless of national origin. That captured weapon, and the dozens of others like it that German forces encountered, taught a lesson that transcended the specific technical details. They taught that good engineering respects no boundaries, that excellence emerges from many sources, that acknowledging competitor strengths is the first step toward improvement. These lessons, learned painfully by German soldiers and engineers during World War II, remain relevant for any organization, military or otherwise, that wants to maintain excellence in a competitive world. The story ends where it began, with a piece of captured equipment being examined by soldiers trying to understand what made it work. Wilhelm Steiner, standing in a French farmhouse in May 1940, looking at a strange British machine gun and deciding to test it rather than destroy it. That decision to investigate, to understand, to report honestly what he found, was a small act of professional integrity in the midst of industrial-scale destruction. Small acts matter. Truth matters. And sometimes, a weapon teaches lessons that transcend warfare itself. The Germans captured a British Bren gun. They tested it thoroughly, professionally, honestly, and they realized it couldn't jam. That realization was uncomfortable, inconvenient, and politically impossible to fully acknowledge. But it was true. And in the final accounting, truth is what matters. Not propaganda, not ideology, not comfortable narratives. Just the simple, undeniable reality of a weapon that worked when everything said it shouldn't be superior. That's the story, that's the lesson, and that's why 75 years later, we're still talking about a machine gun that refused to fail.